Let's take a look at the third type of sentence in English. We have the complex sentence. Complex sentence. 复合句. Okay? A complex sentence has one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So we have one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. The dependent clause has a subordinating conjunction. Subordinating conjunction. 徐连次. Okay. A dependent clause is also called a subordinate clause. A subordinate, the idea is you are under the authority of someone else. A subordinate is someone under the authority of someone else. A dependent clause is under the authority of an independent clause. Okay? A dependent clause is also called a subordinate clause. In your writing academic English book, you can find a list of subordinate conjunctions on page 163 and page 292 to 295. Let's take a look now at the patterns for complex sentences. Two different patterns. We have the subordinating conjunction coming first with the dependent clause, then a comma, and the independent clause. I want you to notice carefully when the dependent clause comes first, you must use a comma. You must use a comma. So we have the dependent clause first, then we have a comma, and the independent clause. The second kind of a pattern is an independent clause first and the subordinating conjunction afterwards and then the dependent clause at the end. Notice there is no punctuation when we have the subordinating conjunction after the independent clause. So the simple pattern here, if we look at this, we have the subordinating conjunction coming first, the dependent clause, then a comma, ending with the independent clause. Here's the example. After Mr. Austin washed the dishes, Mrs. Austin cooked dinner. Notice here that the subordinating conjunction after comes at the beginning, like our pattern. Then we have our dependent clause. It's dependent on the independent clause. It leans on, it must get its meaning from the rest of the sentence. So in other words, we cannot put a period right here instead of the comma and call this first part a sentence. It is not. It is dependent on the second part. That was one pattern. Let's take a look at the second pattern. The second pattern has the independent clause coming first and the subordinating conjunction and then the dependent clause. There is no comma in this sentence. I see this mistake frequently in your writing, so you want to pay close attention to this. We have the independent clause, Mrs. Austin cooked dinner, subordinating conjunction after, and the dependent clause, Mr. Austin washed the dishes. Notice here, if we just wrote this part right here, Mr. Austin washed the dishes, we have an independent clause. What is causing it to be a dependent clause is having the word after, that subordinating conjunction. Notice if I just said, after Mr. Austin washed the dishes, that by itself is not complete. It needs to have more said it needs the independent clause, Mrs. Austin cooked dinner. Moving on now to our last type of sentence, compound complex sentences. A compound complex sentence has two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. There are many possible patterns for this type of sentence. However, they will always follow the rules for the previous sentence types. So here is just one possible example. Dependent clause, comma, independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction. Notice here that if we've got a dependent clause, that this is going to have a subordinating conjunction right here. Okay. After Mrs. Austin got home from work, comma, she cooked dinner and Mr. Austin washed the dishes. After Mrs. Austin got home from work, there's our dependent clause. She cooked dinner. There's one independent clause. Glued together with our comma and coordinating conjunction end. And our second independent clause, Mr. Austin washed the dishes. Let's do a quick review of the different kinds of conjunctions. These are also called transition words. We have coordinating conjunctions, conjunctive adverb, and subordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions like and but. Remember there's 7 of them. Memorize that acronym. Fanboys. Coordinating conjunctions are used with a comma. That's what glues the two sentences together, the comma and the coordinating conjunction. Okay? It's used in a compound sentence, a coordinating conjunction. Conjunctive adverbs. These are also used in a compound sentence. A conjunctive adverb, as you can see, has different punctuation. It has a semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and then a comma. An example, therefore. And finally, a subordinating conjunction. A subordinating conjunction is used along with a dependent clause. That's why we will find it in complex sentences. Subordinating conjunctions go in complex sentences. Let's check for understanding. Take the quiz, check your understanding, write down your answers, and then move on to the next page to see how you did. Write 2 possible patterns for a complex sentence and an example sentence for each one. I put the patterns here. Your sentences would vary. Notice when the subordinating conjunction and the dependent clause come at the end, there is no punctuation. However, when the dependent clause comes in the front, we have a comma to separate it from the independent clause. The second question, name the 3 kinds of conjunctions. We've got the coordinating conjunction, conjunctive adverb, and the subjunctive adverb. The list is in the back of the book for the conjunctive adverbs and subjunctive adverbs because their list is fairly long. I listed all 7 of the coordinating conjunctions here. Once again, bring your answers to class if you'd like some help with your quiz and see how you did. Hopefully this has helped you understand the 4 different sentence types in English.